Okay, hi everyone. So today I'm going to give you a brief overview of administering and scoring of tests. I'm going to go through a little bit of the objectives as well as some of the tests, but I'm not going to go into detail of every single test because you are going to do that for us through your video submissions. Okay, and then also this is outlined very detailed in your book, which you should be reading along with the PowerPoints that I do post. But with that said, let's get moving. Okay, so here we're going to really be talking about different field tests, how to administer them appropriately, evaluate and analyze test data, understand the appropriate statistics. Again, that's usually a review for all of you right now, and then combine the results of selected tests to generate some sort of athletic profile, which you're going to be doing in that assignment that I had just posted for you. Okay, so if we were going to measure maximum muscular strength is a low speed strength test. That's usually related to a 1RM, okay? Related to the force of a muscle or muscle group that can exert in one maximal effort. Now, the key thing here is to remember one maximal effort, but proper form. If someone is using their feet or curling up their legs or arching their back too much or doing something to get maximal effort and their form is all off, we cannot say that is a successful 1RM, okay? This is usually tested on a particular lift, so a bench press. And most of the time, these 1RMs, you will notice when you talk, if someone is going to 1RM test you or you're going to 1RM test someone, it's not going to be a bicep curl or one tricep extension, because it's on a one joint system, right? You really don't want to you don't want to really put that much stress on a joint. So if you did a 1RM bicep curl, let's for example, you may need to find it for a study or estimate it, but that's where you would do an estimated 3 to 5 RM and then put it into a calculation and get an estimated 1RM for study purposes. However, if you're going to get someone's true 1RM of a specific exercise, usually it's multi-joint. So for example, a bench press, right? You have the elbow joint and your shoulder joint. And it's also testing multiple muscles or muscle groups. Another one would be, a deadlift, a power clean, those type of things that are more full body type of exercises and multi-joint exercises where you could actually be safer with the lift. Okay. Anaerobic or maximum muscular strength. This is considered a high-speed strength. So this is related to the ability of muscle tissues to exert high force while contracting at a high speed. This is also called maximal aerobic muscular power or anaerobic power. You may see all of those terms thrown all around all the time. Most of the time they're used synonymously. So this may include vertical jump height and time to sprint up a staircase. So that is pretty much testing your maximal anaerobic power. Why? Because you're using your anaerobic or phosphagen systems at this point. You're not using oxygen during this exercise task. Remember that. Okay, so some key points for muscular strength. Most maximal muscular strength tests use relatively slow movement speeds and therefore reflect low speed strength. Assessment of high-speed muscular strength can involve measuring the 1RM for explosive resistance training or the height of a vertical jump. So that's considered, explosive resistance training. Okay, when we talk about anaerobic capacity, this is the maximal rate of energy production by the combined phosphagen and anaerobic glycolytic energy systems for moderate duration activities, right? So we've talked about this multiple times throughout the semester before, especially towards the beginning of the semester, what anaerobic capacity is, how do we train those anaerobic systems, and what exercises should we be doing to test those anaerobic systems. Now let's go to local muscular endurance. This is the ability of certain muscles or muscle groups to perform repeated contractions against a submaximal resistance. So some examples of that would be, our partial curl-up test, our YMCA push-up, or our bench press test, our YMCA bench press test, the push-up test, right? So those are local muscular endurance type of tests. Aerobic capacity, we know as the maximum rate at which athlete can produce energy through oxidative energy systems, right? So carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Really don't want to be using proteins too much, do we? We don't really be breaking down proteins during an exercise task. That's usually if it's prolonged over 2 hours or during periods of starvation. But we really want to be using those carbohydrates and fats for our oxidative energy sources. So This is usually expressed as a volume of oxygen. We know in absolute terms it's liters per minute, but as you have learned in other classes, or you will learn if you haven't taken them yet, it's also in per kilogram of body weight per minute, so ml per kg per minute, and that's also called aerobic power. So we want to always measure things in relative terms, right? Why? Because it goes back to the concept I talked about at the beginning of the semester, where you want to be able to relate one athlete to the next. So for example, when we talked about, this goes for the same thing for aerobic power, as if someone could, in an absolute sense, lift up 100 pounds, but they themselves were only 110 pounds, and then someone who was, say, 165 pounds could lift 110 pounds. So in an absolute sense, the person who weighs 165 pounds is stronger in an absolute sense because they lift 10 pounds heavier than the other person. But in a relative sense, the other person is actually stronger when you take into consideration their body size and their weight. So it's the same thing with aerobic capacity here. We want to use milligrams per kilogram per minute in order to be able to compare one against the other. So what is agility? Agility is the ability to change direction or speed of the whole body in response to a sport-specific stimulus. So agility testing is generally confined to physical capacity testing, such as change of direction, speed, or cognitive components, such as anticipation. All right, so I want you to start thinking what sports really have agility in them. Okay, I can think of a number of different sports that have a number of different cutting, change of direction, speed, and cognitive components such as reaction time that you would need. All right, so that is where you would start thinking about which athletes would you test and which agility tests would you perform. Speed is the movement distance per unit time, typically quantified as the time taken to cover a fixed distance. So for the most part, the most basic one is that 100-meter sprint. And you hear the gun or the start time, and then boom, and then you start your stopwatch, and then you stop it, and then you see what their 100-meter dash is, okay? Flexibility is the range of motion about a body joint, so there's a number of different flexibility tests you could perform. Balance and stability. Balance is the ability to maintain static and dynamic equilibrium. Static meaning staying the same, dynamic meaning moving. And stability is the ability to return to a desired position following a disturbance in the system, right? So if you were to get knocked off a little bit, can you, balance, and then can you return back to the original starting point of that? So that is considered stability. We know what body composition is. This is relative proportions of weight, of fat, and lean tissue, across the body. We know we measure body composition a number of different ways, which is through the bod pod, through a DEXA, through hydrostatic weighing, skin fold measurements, girth measurements, bioelectrical impedance, and so forth. And then basic anthropometry is the science of measurement applied to the human body. So generally includes measurements of height, weight, and selected body girths, right? So these are the basic baseline measurements that you always get when you do baseline testing. Right, so when we talk about testing conditions, when we're about to now test an athlete or a population, this is some key things you need to be aware of. Maximize the reliability of tests. Again, we talked about that in the last couple lectures. Conditions should be as similar as possible for all these athletes tested and from test to retest of the same athlete. So again, if we tested an athlete at 8 a.m., and it was nice and cool, perfect temperature, just, partly cloudy, sunny, it was great humidity. And then the next time we did a retest, we tested it at 2 p.m. and it was the humidity went to 90% and it was raining. Those are things you need to take into consideration for when you test. Try to mimic very similar days and test conditions compared to when you retest them. So that just leads me to point 2. Temperature, humidity, surface, type of equipment should also be consistent, right? So if you test them on the grass, you should be retesting them on the grass. Don't go put them on the track or don't put them on a basketball floor. You will get different results, okay? Athletes should not be tested when fatigued. If you are overtired or fatigued, do not perform exercise testing then. They should arrive for testing normally hydrated, with standard nutrition, no supplements really, okay? You don't want, hopefully they're not jacking themselves up on caffeine that morning, right? So you try to tell them to eat a well-balanced, healthy diet at that point. And then warm-up for these tests should be standardized. One person should not have a separate warm-up as compared to the other. You want to standardize them across the board. Okay, now we're starting to get into the different tests, but I'm going to go through these and just list them because you guys are going to be the ones explaining them and demonstrating them in video form to me and to the class. Okay, so we're going to do the 1-arm bench press, the bench pull, the back squat, the power clean. We have a standing long jump, the vertical jump using the wall and chalk, as well as the Vertec device, as well as the Just Jump mat, right? We know that we have the Just Jump mat in our lab. And what the Just Jump mat, what vertical jump tells you. The Margarita Kalaman test, what we're going to do, this is a stair sprint test, okay? So this, what you can assume that it's talking about power here. So it's a power test, okay? Right, and here's a good picture of it. A 300-yard shuttle. What is that? What is it measuring? What are the metabolic demands? And here's a good picture of it. A partial curl up, right, is pretty much that sit-up test, okay? And we were talking about local muscular endurance before, so this is going to be testing local muscular endurance. Someone will be demonstrating that. You have our push-up test, right? And there's a different type of push-up test too, right? According to ACSM, you can have a regular push-up test, beginning position, end position, and then also if you need to make adjustments, you can start at the knees. There is a YMCA bench press test, okay? Someone will be explaining that to us. A 1.5-mile run. I don't have anyone demonstrating this one, but this is where athletes perform this test as quickly as possible and at a steady pace. So you pretty much have the distances set here, and then your time is what is recorded in minutes and in seconds, and then you compare times. And most coaches usually aim, depending on the sport, let's just say a 1.5-mile run. They're like, okay, this has to be done in 8 minutes, or not 8 minutes, or 10 minutes, 9 minutes, 10 minutes, or so forth. And it also depends on the sport again. 12-minute run, now that is now time-based, but then it's going to tell you the distance, right? So you also have to see how far you can get with a 12-minute run. So the 12 minutes is standardized, but then you will calculate out the distance that the athlete was able to do. And again, some coaches are like, I'm aiming for you to, in a 12-minute run, to be able to get 1.5 miles. You should at least be able to get 1.5 miles in a 12-minute run. They may say that is their standard or their goal. Okay, someone's going to be explaining this yo-yo intermittent recovery test, okay? So we have a maximal aerobic speed test, right? Right, this is where there's marker cones placed 20 meter in 20 meter intervals around the track usually. The initial speed of the test usually is set between 8 and 12 kilometers per hour, depending on the fitness level of the athlete as well. Then the speed is then increased by 1 kilometer every 2 minutes until the athlete cannot maintain the speed. Okay, so if they can't reach that next cone or the next interval, then their test is done, and you record what they have done from there. Okay, and then you can convert this over into figuring out the maximal aerobic speed test or their VO2 max, which again would be considered their maximal aerobic capacity. Okay, there's a T-test. Again, we should be talking about this. Has to do with sometimes agility and sprint test, or hexagon test, or pro agility test. You wonder what that is going to test. Obviously some sort of agility, which someone will be explaining to us. More agility test, which is a 505 agility test. We have straight line sprints. This is testing anaerobic capacity as well. Right. So for the straight line speed test, you have a set distance, right? And you would either have a 3 or 4 point stance. What does that mean? That means you have 2 feet on the ground and either one hand on the ground or both. You would allow at least 2 practice runs at submaximal speed so they understand the length of the test. And then the athlete assumes a starting position. And then on an auditory signal, the athlete sprints at a specified distance. And usually do this at least twice. And you are going to average the 2 trials, record to the nearest 10th of a second. Okay, and you want to allow at least 2 minutes of active recovery in between those trials. All right, and our next next PowerPoint, I will wrap up the testing and evaluation and how they should be applied and what you should be looking for to apply them to the athletes.